There are few things in this world that will ensure a violent future more than childhood abuse and trauma. This may sound like a bold claim, but hear me out. At one point in my past, I worked a stint at a homeless shelter and another stint trying to find housing for homeless individuals. Of course, the reasons for becoming homeless in the first place are always multifaceted. Could be poor mental health, addictions, abusive relationships, or even sheer bad luck. The phenomena of modern homelessness is an interesting one, though, because in an affluent society like ours, it's almost never simply because there aren't enough material resources to go around. Now, I wouldn't go so far as to say that it's hard to become homeless. However, it is accurate to say that it is significantly more difficult than any time previous. So in this context, the question should be asked, how do people find themselves in this predicament? Well, there have been a lot of postulating and theorizing about the why behind homelessness, and it might be impossible to nail down entirely. One theory that stands out, however, is childhood abuse and trauma. Anecdotally, I can say that anytime I would hear a client's story of how they found themselves on the streets, it almost inevitably ended up having something to do with neglect or abuse in adolescence. And let me be clear, not every person who is abused as a child ends up homeless, addicted, or having a mental health illness. But, in my estimation, my experience, and from what I can tell in the scientific literature, the majority, though certainly not all, of those who suffer from these problems have had experiences with trauma, and often that trauma began in the early stages of life. Of course, I could be wrong about this, and I'm always open to new or contradictory evidence. If you have some or want to argue the point, then please reach out to me via email or direct message. thepeacefulwaypodcast@gmail.com, or you just search The Peaceful Way Podcast on Facebook and Twitter. Anyways, based on this premise, one could surmise that a plethora of other social ills could be alleviated, though I would never say eliminated, if the experience of childhood abuse and trauma was significantly reduced. RecognizeTrauma.org says that those who have experienced trauma are 15 times more likely to commit suicide, 4 times more likely to be an alcoholic, contract a sexually transmitted infection, and use intravenous drugs, as well as 3 times more likely to be on antidepressants, experience depression, work absenteeism, and difficulty keeping a job. You would be 2.5 times more likely to smoke and 2 times more likely to have COPD, as well as running into serious financial difficulties. Not to mention the uncalculated social and economic costs that would be incurred as a result. I think it's fair to say that the strain on relationships, physical health, and the healthcare system around the world would be greatly alleviated without the tertiary effects of childhood abuse and trauma. I've long said, just don't abuse or neglect your kid, and they'll probably end up all right. So much of what happens to us in childhood shapes our patterns, beliefs, and behaviors later on in life, both good and bad. I mentioned earlier my experiences in the homeless sector, but I did not mention that, at the time of recording this, I work with children who are in the foster care system and group homes in my city. In a rather high rate relative to the rest of the population, most of these kids have some kind of developmental issue, ADHD or oppositional defiance behaviors. And most of them, you guessed it, have been abused, abandoned, or neglected. So with this being said, There is a bare minimum standard we should be holding ourselves if we are going to raise a more peaceful future generation that could have untold benefits for the kids who get to grow up in a peaceful and loving environment. But we can and should take it a step further. We shouldn't aim to be mediocre parents, but great parents. It goes without saying that it is a moral imperative that we should not assault our kids, expose them to sexual abuse, or fail to provide the essentials of life. But I would challenge parents, and parents-to-be, if we employ a philosophy of peaceful parenting in how we interact with our children, it could be the case that our kids' futures and the future of society will be much brighter. And just because we may not be leaving our kids with black eyes, sexually assaulting them, or starving them, does not necessarily mean we aren't traumatizing them, or teaching them not to trust us and severing vital emotional connections. The most important thing that a parent can do, in my opinion, is connect to their children. Connection is the bedrock of all relationships, and must come before correction, discipline, confrontation, or even teaching. When we are connected, we have a much better ability to influence and guide out of love instead of punishment. Dr. Laura Markham, in her book, Peaceful Parents, Happy Kids, says that our job as parents should be to constantly connect to our children while they are happy and regulated, so that when they get upset, they are more open to our guidance. It can be very difficult to help a child regulate in an elevated emotional state if we haven't already built a connection with them. When trying to figure out how to peacefully parent, the first thing that must go is spanking. We must drop the notion that corporal punishment is an appropriate way of interacting with your children. It really is incredible how many parents will tell their children, "You're not allowed to hit," and then turn right around and hit them. Not only does it make one hypocritical, it also makes you untrustworthy. When you do this, you are teaching your kids that they cannot trust you, and your words and actions are inconsistent. And when they distrust you, they will disconnect from you. I was spanked as a kid, and I turned out fine, is what I hear people say most often when they are trying to justify spanking. My response to this would be, well, maybe you did turn out fine, whatever that means. But the question you have to ask is turning out fine a reasonable argument for an act of violent discipline? No one would dream of saying, I was locked in a cage for most of my childhood, and I turned out fine. The fact that you perhaps turned out fine is in no way a justification for this kind of punishment. When you are hitting as a form of punishment, we must also think about the child's perspective. Imagine, if you will, you are at work and you do something wrong. As punishment, your boss has a robot 5 times your size who will take you into a room, pull down your pants, and violently hit you on your bare bottom. Does this strike you as appropriate? Would it be traumatizing? Would it be humiliating? Would you love your boss and say, "Thank you for punishing me and raising me as a good employee"? Would you even dream of saying, "I was spanked at work and I turned out to be a good employee"? I think we all know the answers to these questions. Furthermore, the science behind spanking has shown that not only is spanking ineffective, it can in some cases make your children's unwanted behaviors even worse. According to the Gershoff study on spanking in 2013, and in a large meta-analysis by the American Academy of Pediatrics, over 14 studies, it has revealed that spanking is linked to increased violent behavior and physical aggression from children. The following is Dr. Robert Brooks. He's a psychologist on the faculty of Harvard Medical School.
When the topic of spanking comes up, it leads to a lot of different and very emotional feelings. Some parents have said to me, "What's wrong with spanking? I got spanked and I'm okay." And other parents really feel it has no place at all in discipline. I'm not concerned if a parent says to me, "One time I hit my child on the rear end and I know I shouldn't do it." I am concerned when spanking is one of the primary ways that parents are disciplining. And what the research really shows is we've got to find other ways, because spanking in many ways leads kids to be much angrier, and they're all often going to do the same thing with their kids. And it's also, as I say, not very effective. Some parents are fooled and think it's effective because they'll say, "When I spank my child, he or she stops the behavior." But what happens is that behavior continues behind the parent's back often. And what I try to say to parents is we have to find other ways. We can find natural and logical consequences where you say to your child, if you do this, this is going to be taken away, but you don't hit your child. And when some parents say to me that it hurts me more than it hurts my child, I can't buy that. It hurts kids. And I've spoken to adults who were still in tears thinking about times they were spanked by their parents. And many of them interpreted their parents as being out of control. So I say to parents, if you're finding you're spanking and yelling a lot, you've got to step back, maybe even get some help about finding more effective disciplinary techniques.
So, if you can at least agree that hitting our kids probably isn't the right way to raise them, what then should our approach to parenting be? Well, earlier I mentioned Dr. Laura Markham's book, Peaceful Parent, Happy Kids. And it's a great and easy read. I highly recommend it. In that book, Dr. Markham has 3 big ideas in our approach to parenting. So let's go through them. Number 1, regulating yourself. Our job as a parent, and quite honestly as a functioning human being, is to control our own emotions. Taking responsibility for how we feel in any given moment is the mark of a fully actualized adult. Nobody makes you yell, scream, hit, or lose your temper. No matter how difficult your child may be, it is imperative that you control your own emotions first. When you can be the captain of your own mental state, this will model to your child that they can as well. But if they watch you over and over again losing your temper, that's how they will learn to deal with their feelings also. And we have to remember that children do not have a fully developed prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that helps regulate emotion. So it is far more difficult for them to keep themselves in a state of equilibrium than it is for us. If we struggle with emotional regulation, how much more will they? If you find you are having difficulty controlling your emotional state, I would highly recommend meditation, breathing exercises, or even professional therapy. It's worth it for your kids. Other ways to better regulate your emotions can be through healthy diet and exercise, getting a full 8 to 9 hours of sleep per night, as well as having a community or hobby outside of your kids or work. Too much alcohol, drugs, screen time, binge eating, and social media can work to dysregulate our neurochemistry and make us more irritable and impatient. Find the things in your life that create an unbalanced emotional equilibrium and work to correct them. Not only will you feel more happy and fulfilled, it will greatly improve your home life and environment which your kids are growing up in.
Well, the research seems pretty clear that what matters most in how kids turn out is who we are as parents. It's not a set of strategies, right? It's a relationship, and every relationship comes from two people having that relationship. And in our case, we're the guidance, we're the role model, we're the already mature brain. Not that we're not still learning and growing, we are, but we are the ones who set the example for our child to grow, but also on a biological level, our children are born with very incomplete neural systems. And so their limbic system, which is the old word for the emotional parts of the brain and neurology, that limbic system is born pretty unfinished and takes shape in interaction with the parent. Now, all repeated experiences will shape the brain, but when you think about it, what is a baby's repeated experience? Most of it is interactions with the parent. So of course that's true for babies and how their brain takes shape based on our brain and how it functions and our neurology. But of course, pretty soon, kids are consciously interacting with us, aware of what goes on between us, modeling themselves after us, learning about the world, learning about how relationships work. And if we're the kind of person who can stay calm or notice we're getting agitated or anxious or angry, frustrated, if we're the kind of person who can notice and we can stop and calm ourselves down, our child sees that. And a few things happen. One is they learn it's not an emergency. It may have seemed like an emergency to them,
right,
when we insisted it was time to get out of the bathtub or whatever. But in fact, if we react like it's not an emergency, yes, they do have to get out of the bathtub, but it's not an emergency. We can have a productive interaction about it. The child learns from us how to, first of all, they learn it's not an emergency. They learn how to communicate more constructively, and they learn how to calm themselves down when things were getting hot, but then, in fact, they realized they could handle it in a better way. So our ability to self-regulate might have the most impact on who our child turns out to be than anything else we do.
Big idea number 2, fostering connection. By far, the most effective way to get your child to stop misbehaving, listen to your instructions, and end their defiance is not by punishing them, but connecting with them. This may feel counterintuitive, or like you are rewarding bad behavior, but hear me out. Often, when children act out, it is because of internal resentments they feel towards their parents. They feel as if their parents don't care about them, dislike them, or perhaps even want to hurt them. And really, we aren't so different. How much more open are you to someone who you are close to when you know that they love you? Are you more willing to receive criticisms from them, change your behavior for them? Probably the answer is yes. What about when someone who you don't get along with criticizes you or tries to modify your behavior? You're probably far less willing to accept what they have to tell you, valid or not. Children are no different. They too are very much unwilling to cooperate with you if they feel unloved or rejected. So one of the best things we can do to correct bad behavior is not to correct, but connect. Consider it a preventative measure that will stop misbehaving before it even begins. Make sure to schedule one-on-one time with your child, doing fun things or activities that they enjoy. Get them a treat every now and again. Give them lots of hugs and kisses and your attentiveness before it gets bad. If your child is acting out, being punitive will not likely work in the long run. Instead, find the times when everything is calm and they are happy. Then you work to connect deeply with them and build a strong bond. Over time, their behavior will most likely correct itself. Do as much connecting as you possibly can before you need to punish them.
The second thing is connection. You can't control another person, but your influence with them will always come from your connection with them. So how do we build connection? We listen to the child's feelings. We acknowledge. We also find ways to connect when things are going right. The other 24 hours of the day, 23 and a half hours of the day, we're looking for opportunities to connect. We're picking the kid up and throwing them around and getting them laughing because that releases oxytocin and reduces stress hormones. And so we feel when we're laughing with someone, there's more connection. And we acknowledge how they feel, and we look for opportunities just to touch them warmly and to say how lucky we feel to be their parent. Any way that you can connect, and it can just be a warm smile. All of the connections we make in the course of the day are what allow your interventions in those tough moments to work.
The third and final big idea is coaching, not controlling. Nobody likes a tyrant, and children are no exception. To give people agency and free will is the highest order of respect you can afford to another human being. When we try to control people, what we are implicitly saying is, I know better than you, your feelings don't matter, you are a slave, and so on. For controlling parents, there will be diminishing returns on getting your child to behave properly as they get older. They might obey out of fear while they are young, which is in no way to build a connection or have a healthy relationship. But as they get older and more independent, they will defy you more, causing you distress and heartache. A far better strategy is to be a coach, influencer, and guide to your kids. If you have to correct a challenging behavior, a far more effective approach is to coach them with a calm tone of voice and in a manner that communicates that you're not trying to lord yourself over them. However, this will not fix challenging behavior overnight. It takes work and a gradual change from defiance to respect, then to love and connection. If you cultivate this attitude of love and respect in children while they are young, they will grow and learn to accept this as normal and acceptable. They will treat their peers and future family members in much the same way. And they will also expect that behavior in return from others. This will serve as a buffer from toxic relationships later on in life.
So I think that much of the time, if we haven't given any conscious thought to this, we find ourselves with a baby who's growing into a toddler who wants certain things. And here's this little human who we can't communicate with so well verbally, and who really doesn't have much prefrontal cortex, so we can't reason with them. And we don't really know what to do to get them to do what we want. So we just start using force. We pick them up when they go to a place we don't want them to go to. We say no, and then we start escalating. No, I said no, and maybe we slap their hand. No, don't touch that, right? Because we don't really know how to get our child to do what we want except through force. And some parents don't want to be that parent. So they instead use bribes. They use rewards, and all of that presupposes that our child is an object to be manipulated, or at least somebody who doesn't have much brain power, right? So we're using rewards and punishment as opposed to coaching the child to be their best self. So when I say coaching, I mean a few things. First, I mean emotion coaching, so the child can handle their emotions better. That's a big thing. But I also mean coaching by setting up the environment, which means maybe that thing we don't want our child to touch, we need to move away while the child's a toddler. Put it up high, Maybe you don't wear earrings when your child is 15 months old because they're going to grab at your earrings. You just stop wearing earrings for a while. You can put them back on when your kid's a little older. It's not a big deal. But coaching your child to not touch your earrings is going to be, for a baby, an 18-month-old, 15-month-old, is going to be pretty hard. maybe, so coaching means emotion coaching. It means setting up the environment. It also means practicing, helping the child practice so they can learn certain skills, because children need to practice over and over again. As I mentioned, you're building the neural pathways for self-discipline every time the child willingly gives up something they want for something they want more. So the child who really wants to, you're at the beach with your 2-year-old and they're running down the beach, kicking everybody's sandcastles and knocking them down. They're going to love to do that. But there's something they want more than to knock down the sandcastles. They want a warm relationship with a parent. And you can easily get between them and the sandcastle and say, oh no, don't hurt this sandcastle. Picking your child up, looking or getting down on their level, holding them and pointing to the beautiful sandcastle and saying, look how pretty. Oh, look, these kids are working so hard on their sandcastle. Beautiful, nice sandcastle. And then good sandcastle, no touch the sandcastle, no kick the sandcastle. And we move the child away. Well, we might have to do that 10 times with our kid. But he's going to learn, sandcastles are something we don't kick. We can build our own sandcastles and knock them down, but we don't kick other people's sandcastles. And he's going to be motivated to do it, again, building those neural pathways by the warm relationship with us. If we just yell, no, don't do that, he might stop because he's afraid. But then the minute our back is turned, he's going to be back to his old behavior, right? Because he has no motivation to go along with us. But if we have helped him learn why, and then we practice it with him over and over again, he learns how to manage himself in relation to sandcastles. Now, he has to learn how to manage himself also in relation to the candy bars and the checkout line at the grocery store. He has to learn how to manage himself in relation to the children at the children's museum who all want the same toy he wants. He has to learn, or the kids at the playground who all want to, go backward up the slide, or he wants to go backward and he doesn't want to share it. So he will have to manage himself over and over again in many situations. His motivation will come from us, but we also have to help him practice exercising that self-discipline so he gains the brain power to do it, basically.
With peaceful parenting, kids will grow into far more well-balanced and emotionally regulated adults. They will also learn a number of invaluable life skills, one of which is the superpower of negotiation. The ability to be a competent negotiator has unfortunately become a lost art in today's society. When you are unable to negotiate the terms of a relationship, boundaries, and employment, you become far more susceptible to being manipulated, taken advantage of, becoming hurt or offended, being codependent, and even making less money. The skill of negotiation helps us to build empathy for others, work towards compromises, and have healthy and constructive conflicts. When we are peaceful parenting, we are constantly negotiating with our kids whenever possible, not just lording our power over them. This may not be practical while they are very young, but as they get older, implementing more and more negotiation will communicate that what they think matters, they aren't your slave, and that you love and respect them. It can also help in future problem-solving skills, because rather than just getting angry, yelling, and hitting, you have to figure out a way to find a mutually beneficial arrangement for all parties. The issue with using violence or heavy-handed punishment with our kids is that it's often a one-size-fits-all solution that doesn't actually help to solve the problem or the cause of the emotional dysregulation in the first place. When a child does not want to do what you say, like refusing to take a bath, for example, it's not that your child is trying to be defiant. It's that they disagree that bath time is necessary, or they believe there are better things they could be doing with their time. Often the best approach to this, rather than threatening them with punishment, is to start asking why they don't want to have a bath, what would motivate them to have a bath, and how you and your child can partner together in figuring out how to do bath time in a time-sensitive manner. When you bring your child along in the process and the logic behind why they need to do things they may not want to do, you not only teach them important life lessons about having to do things you don't want to do, but you also teach them how to work as a team to solve problems. And remember, it's important to model to your child that they have agency and that you aren't their slave master. You are their parent. I can understand that this can be a difficult form of parenting, especially if you have always had a non-peaceful approach to it. Old habits die hard. It can also be hard if you were like me and these poor behavior patterns were modeled to you by being raised in a home where it was normal to yell, lose your temper, dole out punishments, and hit. It can be painful to confront our own shortcomings, especially where we ourselves have failed. Or perhaps it feels unfair because some of us were abused as kids, or we never received the love and affection every child deserves. It may even be the case that some of these wounds will never fully heal for many of us, which is why it is so vital we do not continue the cycle of violence with our own children. I believe that the most important contribution that can be made to creating a less violent world is modeling nonviolence to our children. And along with that, we will reduce the abuse and trauma experienced by our kids, whether we intended to inflict it or not. And we can start a whole new generation that can learn to peacefully negotiate and get along with others. On another note, when it comes to violent video games, movies, television, sports like rugby or football, and physical disciplines like martial arts, I do not personally take a strong stance for or against them. And there is a sense that there is really no way to fully shelter a child from witnessing violence through all of these different mediums. I think that it is something parents have to decide for themselves what is acceptable and make clear delineations between make-believe and the real world. It is my opinion that there is very little evidence that shows that violent media causes or even contributes to violent behavior later on in real life. There is, however, mounting evidence that abused or neglected children are far more likely to engage in this type of behavior, which is why there is so much more weight on how we behave and act with our kids. So with all that being said, I hope there are some insights, or you at least have the wheels turning on how your parenting style might be perpetuating cycles of violence that are generational in nature. And if you don't have kids or don't intend on having kids, I hope you can have some empathy and insight into how and why non-peaceful approaches to parenting may be harmful. Hey folks, thanks for listening to this episode. The audio clips I used were taken from Dr. Markham's interviews she did on the Parenting Junkie YouTube channel and the podcast The Knowledge Project with Shane Parrish. Make sure to check them out and give their content a follow. Peace.